Hello, my name is Nicola Ewell and I'm a developmental psychologist at the University of Sussex, carrying out a pilot project into the characteristics of Wiedemann-Steiner Syndrome with my colleagues Camilla Elphick and Jess Marshall. My research in general looks at understanding and supporting social behaviour, interaction and relationships in children with developmental differences, particularly children with autism and a range of learning disabilities. I was approached by Camilla about some research into Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome recently. As you probably know, the genetic picture was only identified in 2012. That means that there is really very little research, especially on what are the typical behaviour patterns, relationships and social interactions of children with this syndrome. We need to know what are the most common strengths and difficulties. This really needed to help parents to know what to expect and especially to help educate health professionals and people in education. This means that people in schools, clinics and other services can be better informed and can plan better to cater for the needs of these children. So far, we've done an initial study interviewing parents about the characteristics of their children with Wiedemann-Steiner. The work was done using a scheme from the University of Sussex to fund an undergraduate student to work for 8 weeks in the summer of 2019. The student is Jess Marshall, and now I'll hand over to her.
So myself and my colleague Hannah Viner interviewed 25 parents about their experiences of Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. I realised pretty quickly that parents' descriptions of their child's behaviours were somewhat similar to one another, so Nicola and I counted to see how often each behaviour was mentioned, and we then grouped these behaviours into themes. I just want to briefly point out a few of these similar behaviours that you can see on the slides. So 84% of parents said their child is socially confident, 68% of parents said their child is affectionate and happy, and 68% of parents said that their child has meltdowns. In one interview, a parent said to me, "He's extremely friendly and extremely social and he wants nothing more than to have friends around him." And I really think that this quote gives you a good insight into the type of social behaviours that parents described. Moving on to the next slide, focusing on peer and sibling relationships, 64% of parents said that their child has difficulty playing with peers, and 44% of parents said that their child behaves differently at home and school. One thing that I found particularly interesting was that some parents emphasised how much their child with Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome values their sibling. And I think this is shown nicely by the parent who said, "There's so much love there and it's beautiful to see." We grouped the rest of the behaviours into a theme called cognitive features. 84% of parents said their child has aggressive episodes, 64% of parents said their child has rapid changes in behaviour, and 64% of parents said their child has sensory issues. One parent described their child's changes in behaviour as though they go from 1 to 10 in the space of 5 seconds. So, what do these results mean? Well, from analysing these interviews, we can see common behaviour patterns and interaction styles between people with Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. Understanding these behaviour patterns and interaction styles can help form effective behaviour management strategies and give people a better understanding of how those with WSS might behave and communicate. I also think that it's really important to recognise that understanding these behaviours and interaction styles can help develop these children's strengths. When I asked parents what their child is good at, plenty of parents didn't even hesitate to tell me about how empathetic their child is, or how good they are at making people laugh, or how much they love sports. I really think that if people are aware of these behaviours and interactions, we can provide a good environment in which positive traits can stand out. It's also important to mention that these initial findings are essential for educating professionals, because if professionals know more about Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome, families will be better supported, particularly through the diagnosis process, which lots of parents mentioned was challenging. I'll now hand over to Camilla to talk about future research.
As Jessica explained, the interviews have been really important in helping us to understand the way that parents experience Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. However, as you all know, much more work is needed. So during the interviews, we asked parents themselves to tell us what they thought were priorities for research, and they identified these. So managing behaviours is a priority which mainly focuses on the child and the primary carer or carers. And many parents indicated that they needed ways to manage difficult behaviours, such as aggressive episodes, rapid changes in behaviour, or meltdowns. Family support is a priority that extends beyond the child and the primary carers to include the entire family. And parents expressed particular concern for the siblings of the child with Wiedemann-Steiner Syndrome and for the lack of resources either that are available at all or accessible to them. Safety is a priority that extends beyond the family, beyond the safe environments such as home and school, to include the wider world. And several parents mentioned that the social confidence and impulsivity in their child can make them vulnerable when interacting with strangers. And parents also wanted to know how to navigate teenage years or how to transition from childhood to adulthood. And this is related to the final priority, which is planning for the future. So parents were concerned here about not knowing what to expect as their child develops, because this makes it really difficult for them to prepare for the future. So we decided that our next step should be to focus on the first of these, which is managing behaviours. And what we wanted to do was to establish what is known as a behavioural phenotype. Now this is a term that's used to describe things like behaviour or development in individuals who have an identified chromosomal anomaly, and these are people like those who have Wiedemann-Steiner syndrome. So why is this important? Well, to manage behaviour, we really need to know what the behaviour is, and we need to know why it occurs. For instance, as Jess and I have both mentioned, many parents found that their children had meltdowns. Of course, it's important to know about these, but it's also really important to know why the children have them. So, one research question might be, do certain things in the environment trigger meltdowns, or are they triggered by something that's going on in the brain? And this something would not be directly related to the environment, but could be independent of it. Or the final option could be, is it a combination of both the environment and what's going on in the brain? We can also find ways to channel strengths, such as social confidence, by using research. So by establishing a behavioural phenotype, we might get closer to answering questions like these. Also, we should be able to create a knowledge foundation from which we can work on the other priorities that parents identified. I'm now going to hand back to Nicola to talk about our goals.
So, what's next? The first thing we have to do is to write up our results in full so that they're part of the scientific literature on this syndrome. Now, as we found, some patterns of behaviour that we found are unique to Wiedemann-Steiner, but some of them are shared with other syndromes. So we need to talk to experts in those other neurodevelopmental conditions to see what's the same, what's different, what work has been done for supporting these different behaviours in other conditions. Now, working with other experts and doing further work does take time and resources, so the first thing we have to do is to apply for funding so that we can develop these questions. When we get that, our first plan is to make a web survey, and that allows us to include many more people than the people that we interviewed individually on the phone. We're also very keen to organise an awareness campaign. One of the biggest concerns of parents was the lack of understanding of professionals and what the needs of the children and families are. So we would like medical professionals and schools to understand the needs of children and families much better. We couldn't have done any of this work without the families, so thank you so much to them, and also to the Wiedemann-Steiner organisations in both the UK and the US who have been very supportive. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and you can keep up to date with how things are going and the future work by following us on Twitter, and we'll also be advertising the web survey on there and also through the Wiedemann-Steiner foundations. And our final slide is a summary of our results from this first survey. Thank you for listening.